According to the U.S. Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, about 200,000 people in the United States suffer a concussion while playing sports every year. What are the symptoms of a concussion? How do they affect brain function, both short-term and long-term? Let's talk about it.
Welcome to My Healthy Mind. I'm Elizabeth Atkins.
And I'm Michael Hunter.
Every week on My Healthy Mind, we invite guests to talk about mental health issues that people are often reluctant to talk about in public. Our guests include mental health experts along with people who have triumphed over mental health issues. Today, we're talking about athletes who sustain concussions. What happens and how do they recover?
Well, first we'll talk with Dr. Bradley Merker, a neuropsychologist and co-director of the Sports Concussion Clinic at Henry Ford Health System. He's also a consultant to the Detroit Red Wings and the Detroit Lions, our favorite sports teams.
That's right, Michael. Then we're going to talk with Christina Ayers. She's an athletic trainer and manager of athletic training for Henry Ford Health System. She'll explain the role that athletic trainers play on and off the field.
And we don't want to end our program without talking to a star college athlete who sustained a concussion playing soccer.
Please join us after the break to meet today's guests on My Healthy Mind. Welcome to My Healthy Mind, a show that dares to talk about mental health, addiction, abuse, domestic violence, depression. Have these challenges affected you? Watch My Healthy Mind every Sunday at noon on TV 20. Let's talk about it.
Stress, depression, and severe mental illness can happen to anyone. Team Mental Health Services has been helping those struggling with these conditions in southeastern Michigan. Within 24 hours of reaching out to our team, members receive psychiatric evaluations and begin the necessary treatment for recovery.
Towards the 6th court date, I finally stood up and said, I can handle this process the rest of the way. And it was all because of the motivation and encouragement I got from Team Mental Health staff.
Team Mental Health Services, because we care and you can.
Everybody has a dream. Mine was to see the ocean. And with a little help, I made it.
Mental illness affects 1 in 5 adults. It's time we talk about it. Actress and mental health advocate Marielle Hemingway will share her personal story at the Team Cares Luncheon on Tuesday, March 29th. For tickets, visit team-cares.org.
Welcome back to My Healthy Mind. We're here with Dr. Bradley Merker, who is a neuropsychologist and co-director of the Sports Concussion Clinic for Henry Ford Health System. He's also a consultant to the Detroit Red Wings and Detroit Lions. Dr. Merker, welcome to My Healthy Mind.
Good afternoon.
There's been a lot of media attention lately about athletes who suffer concussions. Can you start by telling us what is a concussion?
Well, a concussion is an injury to the brain that often happens when an individual gets struck in the head, the face, or the neck, or even the body. Concussion basically takes place when there's a rapid acceleration or deceleration, and the head may rotate within its axis, producing some shearing and straining within the skull. And that produces some short-term, rapid onset symptoms that typically last from days to weeks. The symptoms typically can fall into 3 categories. They can be cognitive symptoms or thinking symptoms, So problems with attention, concentration, memory. They can be physical symptoms, so loss of consciousness, dizziness, visual changes, sensitivity to light, sensitivity to noise, and there can be emotional or behavioral symptoms, so sleep difficulties, irritability, some anxiety, depression. There may not be a loss of consciousness. In most cases, there is no loss of consciousness, and it tends to be more of a functional injury rather than a structural injury, and that's why when you send individuals for a CT scan or an MRI of the head, oftentimes those are read as negatives because there's really no structural damage.
Dr. Merker, what's the difference between mild and severe concussion?
The grading system that I see most frequently is by the American Academy of Neurology, and they grade concussions on 3 different levels, from mild to severe. So level 1, or mild concussion, is basically there's no loss of consciousness, there's some transient confusion, and then symptoms typically last 15 minutes or less. So a moderate concussion or a level 2 concussion, again, no loss of consciousness, there's some transient confusion, and this time symptoms last 15 minutes or longer. And then the level 3, or the severe concussion, would be a positive loss of consciousness.
And so once you establish the degree of the severity, how are they treated?
Well, in terms of treating concussion, there's really no difference if you look at mild versus severe in terms of outcome. The outcome is the same. Almost 90% of people fully recover, get back to their baseline level of functioning. So what we do primarily is provide a lot of psychoeducation. What are the symptoms of concussion? What is the normal recovery pattern? What is the expected outcome? Now we're going to talk to them about the specific symptoms that they're experiencing. So if they've got physical symptoms, we may recommend physical therapy, vestibular therapy, pain management. We may talk about some sleep issues, so things like sleep hygiene. We're also going to talk about a brief period of cognitive rest, as well as physical rest, to allow them to recover a little bit better so that they can get back to normal activities quicker. We're also going to prescribe perhaps some low-level exercise for those individuals that are a little bit slower to recover. We want to get them back to some normal activities. And we find that physical exercise, low-level activity, often helps with that recovery.
Parents are probably getting more concerned about concussions for young children. Is there any greater risk for a child at any particular age group?
Well, when I talk to parents about having their kids involved in sports, for the kids that have never had a concussion and they're not involved in contact sports, I definitely think, in my opinion, that the benefits of participation in sports outweigh the risks. For those that have had concussions in the past, we do know that there is increased risk for kids. You know, particularly as you advance through the age ranges, getting up into high school, into college, the risk does increase because of contact predominantly. But the younger kids are more vulnerable to concussion, and that in part is because of anatomical and physiological differences, as well as their brains are rapidly growing and developing over time. And because of that, they are more susceptible to the effects of concussion, and they typically take longer to recover.
And Dr. Merker, in the media, we've heard a lot about multiple concussions. Can you tell us what the risks of multiple concussions are, please?
Well, individuals that have one concussion, we know that they are at slightly more risk than individuals who have never had a concussion of having a concussion again. Once they get to 3 or more concussion, that risk goes up by 3 times. So they're 3 times more likely to have a concussion than someone who's never had a concussion. We also know that once you've had a concussion or multiple concussions, we have to be a little bit concerned about the amount of force required to produce the same type of injury. So oftentimes less force is required to produce another concussion. And we also tell athletes and their parents that if they've had multiple concussions, we have to be concerned at some point they may not get back to that baseline level of functioning.
And by baseline, you mean back to normal?
Back to normal, back to their pre-injury level of functioning.
Dr. Merker, thank you so much for joining us today. You've given us so much insight in just a little bit of time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And we're going to talk more about concussions with your colleague, Christina Ayers, who is an athletic trainer. And she's going to talk to us about preventive measures for concussions as well as the recovery period for athletes. We'll be right back.
Of all the things you've done with your bike, donating it to Goodwill may be the most incredible of all. Your donations help fund job placement and training for people in your community, which means your stuff can be more powerful than you think. Goodwill. Donate stuff, create jobs.
Reformers. Each set sold separately, batteries not included.
Start a story. Adopt at theshelterpetproject.org.
Welcome back to My Healthy Mind. We're pleased to have with us Christina Ayers, an athletic trainer and manager of athletic training for Henry Ford Health Systems. Christina, welcome to My Healthy Mind.
Thank you for having me.
A little bit ago, we talked with Dr. Merker, and we talked about the signs and types of concussions. Tell us what the role of the athletic trainer is on and off the field in regards to concussions.
Well, in terms of any sport injury, concussion included, an athletic trainer being present can prevent injuries. We can manage them once they do occur, and then we can do the return to sport for the athletes. You know, building rapport with your athletes so that they trust you and they come to you with issues. Also knowing their personality. I know Dr. Merker had talked about having a few cognitive issues at times or some mental aspects of a concussion. And so really truly knowing that athlete and how they normally act. You know, some are naturally a little bit more goofy on the sidelines. Oftentimes some are a little bit more serious. And when a concussion occurs, that can change a bit. So knowing your athlete and having that rapport with them and knowing how they normally act really does help. You also have to have the trust in the team to have your coach know that you're not just pulling somebody out because they're not truly injured. The one thing that's really hard with concussion is it's not something that you can physically see oftentimes. And so, you know, every hit doesn't necessarily produce a concussion, and oftentimes some of your lesser hits might produce one. So knowing, you know, how that athlete generally acts and having that rapport with the coaches and the athletes really does help tremendously.
And what can athletes do to prevent concussions?
You know, a couple different things. One is making sure that you have properly fitted equipment. Oftentimes parents will ask us about different types of helmets and they want to get something that's, you know, revolutionary or something that's a little bit higher priced, but really just making sure that that helmet fits an individual properly is very important, especially as kids are growing up. Sometimes they recycle equipment and it might not be the proper equipment for them, or if an athlete has a growth spurt or a hairstyle change, that can often change how that equipment fits, at least in terms of a helmet. Making sure that their environment is safe, making sure that goalposts are padded, making sure that nets are installed properly, you know, checking the fields for holes or irregular playing surfaces is really important. You know, referees are extremely important during a game, especially in the beginning, because they really do set the tone of how that athletic event is going to go. And if they call a couple fouls early on, it kind of sets the stage of we're taking how you're acting seriously, and usually the athletes will back off a little bit in that regard. So that's all very important with prevention.
And so with 20 plus players on the field at any given time, what are you looking for as you watch the field versus the sidelines?
Well, when I watch the game, it's a little bit different than probably how you all watch the game. I'm looking at feet, making sure that people are doing their stances properly, they're not staggering. I'm checking for blood, I'm checking for other things during a game, and so I really don't watch the game per se, I'm more watching the athletes. You know, I oftentimes at timeouts, I'll walk around just to see that everybody's going, you know, make eye contact with them, because sometimes those little hits that don't seem like they're much could produce a concussion depending on how they're hit.
And once a concussion occurs, what role do you play as an athletic trainer to help the athlete through the recovery process?
Well, when you look at the recovery process with a concussion, you've got the cognitive phase. So having them understand that, you know, you're using your brain when you're using your cell phone. So putting the iPads away, putting the text messaging away. So having them truly understand what it means to cognitively rest, and then help walk them through kind of that cognitive reintroduction. So once they're feeling a bit better, they might do homework for 15 minutes, a half hour, and then put it down, see how they're doing, and then we might introduce them to a half a day of class or a full day of class. After that cognitive aspect is going well, we can work them through the exertional workout, working with them to do that low impact, gradual return. And when we say low impact, we want them to be on a stationary bike or elliptical. We're increasing their heart rate, but we're not jarring them. And so if symptoms aren't returning and then we get them to run and the symptoms return, there might be other things that we can be doing with the neck because the neck could be triggering those symptoms. And then we're there for the non-contact practice or drills. We're there for the full contact practice, and then we would return them to a full game or competition.
Christina, thank you so much for joining us today. You've given us great insight to the role of the athletic trainer in keeping our athletes healthy and safe, especially in regards to concussions. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
After we take a short break, we're going to meet Tatum Zarowski, a soccer player who sustained a concussion during practice and has made a successful recovery. We'll be right back.
Looks like it's done.
Don't let salmonella get funky with your chicken. On average, 1 in 6 Americans will get a foodborne illness this year. You can't see these microbes, but they might be there. So learn the right temperature to cook each type of meat. Keep your family safe at foodsafety.gov.
Welcome to My Healthy Mind, a show that dares to talk about mental health matters that touch nearly every family, yet many find difficult to talk about. Addiction, abuse, domestic violence, depression, alcoholism, suicide. Have these challenges affected you? Each week you'll meet guests who share their stories, hear from local experts, and learn about resources that may help. Watch My Healthy Mind every Sunday at noon on TV 20. Let's talk about it.
Stress, depression, and severe mental illness can happen to anyone. Team Mental Health Services has been helping those struggling with these conditions in southeastern Michigan. Within 24 hours of reaching out to our team, members receive psychiatric evaluations and begin the necessary treatment for recovery.
Towards the 6th court date, I finally stood up and said, I can handle this process the rest of the way. And it was all because of the motivation and encouragement I got from Team Mental Health staff.
Team Mental Health Services, because we care and you can.
Welcome back to My Healthy Mind. We're here with Tatum Zarowski, a soccer player and senior at the University of Detroit Mercy. Tatum, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. A few months ago, you suffered a concussion. Can you tell us what happened?
Sure. Actually, it was back in September. It was a finishing practice, so it was my job at the time to get in the mix off of a corner kick and try to head the ball into the net. And what actually happened is I took an abnormal head ball off the top of my head instead of taking the head ball, which is where we're normally supposed to take it, which is on the frontal bone of your skull. And at the time, I didn't even notice that I had a concussion. I had no idea, actually. I noticed that it was off and that it hurt, but that was pretty much it. And after that, I didn't really start experiencing symptoms until the following evening, which is kind of unusual. So the following day, the dizziness never went away, and I knew at that time that it was time to go see my athletic trainer at UDM. And he was the one that said, maybe you should see the school doctor and see if you got a concussion. So that was the part where I got diagnosed with a concussion, and like I said, it was kind of unusual. The symptoms weren't immediate, and so the doctor said that it was probably more of a moderate or mild concussion.
And what was the recovery process like?
Well, at first, you think it's difficult being the soccer player because they tell you that you have to sit out from very important conference games and practices. So me being a soccer player, that's important on the field, that was hard to do. But besides that, the protocol for concussions is pretty strict. It's pretty much the same for all concussions, even though a lot of concussions vary widely. Everyone's got different symptoms, and everyone's symptoms onset at different times. So even though my concussion was different, I had to follow the same protocol. And the protocol includes a series of testings, and then as well as those frequent check-ins with my athletic trainer. And the tests include both physical tests and cognitive tests. So first I would do some physical testing on the elliptical, and I would try to raise my heart rate to certain levels while doing certain amounts of physical activity. And they would try to monitor to see if any symptoms were occurring at those different heart rate levels. And then once those symptoms were passed, or once those tests were passed, and I had no symptoms, at that point then I would take a computerized test to measure my mental capabilities. Now I had taken the same computerized test as an incoming freshman into the program, and so my results from the test after having my concussion, after the symptoms went away, were compared with those test results from the beginning of my soccer career at UDM. And then besides that, after those tests were all passed, I was slowly introduced back to the sport. So I practiced with no contact, and then I practiced with contact, and then eventually I was allowed to play in a real game again.
And how did you feel then?
At first I was very timid on the soccer field. I tried to minimize the head balls and kind of avoid them actually because I was a little bit scared, but it came to the point where those were necessary and everything ended up being just fine. I actually never had any other symptoms other than at the very beginning symptoms when I had the dizziness that I experienced. And also besides that, I also experienced some difficulty focusing or concentrating for long periods of time. So if I was studying for an exam, I really had to be able to sit back and relax because I would experience headaches if I was trying to concentrate too hard for a long period of time. So besides the dizziness and the difficulty concentrating, those symptoms at the beginning, I never had any other complications after that. So getting back into the game was actually pretty good for me, and the overall recovery process for me was only about a week and a half. And that's actually really short for actual concussion recoveries because depending on the type of concussion or the severity of the concussion recovery could take anywhere between 1 week, but it could go all the way up to 3 or 4 weeks, depending on the severity. So I was very fortunate that my concussion was more mild or moderate and that I could recover so quickly and get back to the game.
Mm-hmm. And you were still proceeding with caution, and Michael and I have talked about the issue of peer pressure. Yes. So if you're getting back in the game and you have this new awareness about concussion, what about your teammates? What if they're saying, we really need you to play now and we need you to play this role because you're the best? And did you feel that pressure did anybody want to put your performance over your safety?
Actually, my teammates were very understanding. I was fortunate to have that experience with them and that communication with them because even though I was a key player and I did need to be out on that field, they were completely understanding with the situation that I was going through. And they told me to sit out as long as I needed to and come back strong, so that I could participate fully when I was better and when I could do so. So I had that good relationship with my teammates where they weren't pressuring as much. Like I said, most of the pressure came from myself, wanting to get back out onto that field, wanting to play in the important games and be, part of the success as a team. But at that point, it was hard to realize, but necessary to realize that your future down the road is what's important. You need to take a look at the bigger picture and the consequences down the road of these symptoms that you're having from the concussion and if they can, have some drawbacks later on. So at the time when I was experiencing the symptoms, I didn't know for sure if it was a concussion or I didn't know how far I could push myself or if they were really even serious. And once I started feeling the symptoms and how dizzy I was and that I actually did have difficulty studying, that's when I realized that it was time to take these symptoms seriously, go through the recovery process as long as it needs to take and pass the tests truthfully, being honest with my athletic trainer, being honest with myself, and taking a look at the bigger picture to realize that there are more important things than getting back to the game no matter how much I want to play.
Mm-hmm. And you had a friend who set an example to you about the severity of what you were dealing with, right?
Yes. Actually, another part of the recovery process, in the back of my mind the whole time I had in the image of my friend who plays softball at Detroit Mercy, and she had so many concussions as a catcher that she was actually kept out of the game for good. She couldn't return to the game of softball because of the amount of concussions that she did have. So in the back of my mind, during my recovery process, I knew that I had to take my symptoms seriously because they couldn't have consequences down the road.
Tatum, thank you so much. We'll be right back.
I want to eat apples and bananas. I need to eat apples and bananas. Why can't I eat?
1 in 5 children struggles with hunger in America. Support the Feeding America nationwide network of food banks to help provide meals to those in need. Join us at feedingamerica.org.
Mental illness affects 1 in 5 adults. It's time we talk about it. One of the most famous legacies of suicide and mental illness is the Hemingway family. Join us Tuesday, March 29th for the Teen Cares Luncheon, when actress and mental health advocate Marielle Hemingway will share her personal struggles and triumphs. For tickets and information, call 734-667-4425 or visit us at teen-cares.org. We want to thank Dr. Bradley Merker for informing us about all the information we just learned about concussions. We also want to thank Christina Ayers, an athletic trainer who told us what her job entails and how she's so very helpful on the field to help student athletes stay safe. And we were so impressed with Tatum Zarowski, the soccer player who is very conscious of what concussion is, what are the consequences, and how she helped herself get better. Michael, what was your favorite thing about today's show?
I think one of the things I really appreciated about today's show was Dr. Merker teaching us the different severities of a concussion. So you had mild, moderate, and severe, but more importantly that the recovery process is the same pretty much for all of them. And that it's so important to go through the recovery process and do all of the steps, follow the protocols so that you indeed get healthy at the end. I think that was very, very informative today.
Absolutely. And what I found most informative was when Christina Ayers explained what does an athletic trainer do. I see the athletic trainers at my son's basketball game and I see them helping students who need ice or have a bruise, but I really have a much better understanding of the importance of their role.
And Tatum just really put a smile on my face to have such a young person so aware of the current situation and keeping her eye on her health for the future. That was really, really inspiring.
Before we close today, we want to remind you that no topics about mental health and wellness are off limits on our show. What do you want us to talk about? Contact us and let us know. Be sure to visit us on Facebook and Twitter and on our website, myhealthymind.com. There you'll find helpful resources and links to view other My Healthy Mind shows. When you contact us, rest assured that we keep your information private. We can't wait to hear from you. Thank you again for joining us today, and we'll see you next week.